The night I realized my little backyard fence had turned into a full-on war. I was standing in front of a packed HOA meeting with a microphone in my hand and 100 neighbors staring at me like I was the problem. 5 minutes later, those same people were watching our HOA president, Linda Graves, slowly unclip her shiny little president pin and set it on the table after the board voted her out. And that tiny click, when the metal hit the wood, sounded a lot like a verdict. It felt good. I won't lie, but it all started with something stupidly small. Just me, a broken fence, and this belief that if you follow the rules, people will leave you alone. My name's Ethan Cole. I'm a senior electrical engineer, which is a fancy way of saying I'm the guy who reads the fine print. Nobody else bothers with measures, everything twice, keeps folders of receipts just in case, and likes things lined up and predictable. After my divorce, I bought a modest place in a subdivision called Cedar Ridge Estates. Quiet streets, maple trees, kids on scooters, dads, pushing lawnmowers, the usual, and an HOA that mostly sent emails about trash cans and weeds. Annoying, but not scary. You know what I mean. The one ugly thing on my property was the side fence, an old wooden line from the late 80s that leaned like it was exhausted. Gray splintered nails, rusted out half of it, already swallowed by my neighbor's roses. And every time a storm rolled through, I'd wonder if this was the one that finally knocked it over. The HOA had sent a couple polite, "Please address." Deteriorating fence letters over the years, nothing heavy. And when a winter storm finally took out a big section, I decided, all right, enough, let me fix it once and fix it right. So I did what I do. I overdid it. I pulled the CCNRs, read every line about fences, setbacks, heights, materials, cross-checked the city code, just to be safe, then drove around the neighborhood like some awkward fence inspector taking pictures of what seemed to fly under the radar. When I felt like I actually understood the rules, I went on the HOA portal, filled out the architectural request, clicked Repair Existing Fence because I was keeping the same line, same height, same footprint, just swapping rotting wood for powder-coated metal panels that look like wood. And don't fall apart, attached photos and measurements, hit submit, and waited. 2 weeks later, I got the email. Everyone hopes for big green. Approved, signed by the architectural committee. And I remember thinking, see, this is how it's supposed to work. You respect the process. The process respects you. First warm Saturday, I rented an auger, dug out the old posts, set new ones in the same holes with fresh concrete, ran a string line until the top was dead straight, bolted in the panels. Same 6 feet as before. Same line the old fence had followed for decades. And by late afternoon, I was sweaty sore and honestly, pretty proud. My yard finally looked like an adult lived there. I took one last photo and had that quiet little moment of, okay, one thing in my life is finally handled. And right on cue, a white SUV with Cedar Ridge Estates HOA on the door rolled to a stop at the curb. Out stepped Linda in a navy blazer and heels clipboard, welded to her hand, and behind her came 2 board members with their own stacks of paper, the whole procession walking up my driveway like they were serving a warrant instead of looking at a fence. She didn't say hi, didn't ask how things were going, just gave the fence a quick once-over and said in a flat office voice, "This fence is unauthorized and must be removed immediately." I actually laughed, held up my phone and said, "You guys approved this." I've got the email, that nervous little laugh, where you're still hoping it's just a mix-up, and she didn't even blink. She flipped a page on her clipboard, held out a bright orange violation notice, and read it like a script. Your application states, repair existing wooden fence. What we have here is a metal fence installation, which falls under a different structural classification section, 14.3.5. You are in violation. You have 48 hours to remove it. After that, fines of $500 per day will accrue. You may appeal at a hearing on Tuesday at 9 a.m. I looked down at the notice and saw a tiny detail that stuck in my brain. At the bottom, it was time-stamped 3:30 p.m. I checked my watch. It was 3:50 the last panel had gone up, maybe 10 minutes earlier, which meant that violation was printed before she even saw the fence. That was the first little crack in the story for me. The first moment I thought, okay, this is not about some honest misunderstanding. That night, my kitchen table turned into a war room. The violation notice my approval email printed out. The bylaws spread everywhere, highlighters and sticky notes all over, and the more I read, the more. My chest tightened, $500 a day. Threats of liens legal action to recover costs, all wrapped in polite legal phrasing that boiled down to, we can crush you if we feel like it. I felt stupid at first, like I'd missed something obvious, then embarrassed that the HOA truck had been parked in front of my house, like I was some kind of problem child. And underneath that, this slow burn of anger, because I knew I'd followed every rule they'd given me. In my head, I had two options. Rip the fence out, swallow the cost, apologize for existing, and hope they forgot my name, or push back and figure out why they'd come at me this hard. And somewhere between being tired of getting pushed around in life and knowing I'd done nothing wrong, I decided I was done rolling over. So I did what engineers do when things stop making sense. I went looking for data. I pulled my security camera footage, and sure enough, there was Linda's SUV 2 days before the violation. She got out with a laser measure and clipboard, walked the side yard where the fence would be checked. The property pins took pictures, then drove away, all before I'd touched a post. I dug through the HOA's online archive and found buried in the minutes from a boring meeting 6 months earlier a little line where they added section 14.3.5, the exact rule she quoted, reclassifying material changes as a new structural category, and that meeting just happened to be the week I was out of state for a conference. Maybe that's just how scheduling worked out, but put together with the pre-printed violation and the surprise visit, it stopped feeling random. Still, I knew none of that would matter if she walked into the hearing and said, his fence isn't even on his land, so I called an independent survey company and begged them to squeeze me in. They came out with their tripods and GPS gear, checked the old 1987 plat map against modern coordinates, and the lead surveyor finally walked over and said, Mr. Cole, your fence and the old one before it are about 3 feet over your recorded property line. You're technically on your neighbor's parcel on paper, and you're not the only one. Looks like the original subdivision survey was off. I just stood there in my yard thinking, great. The one time I decide to stand my ground. The ground itself is wrong on the map. You know what I mean. But if the fence was technically on my neighbor's parcel, then the most honest thing I could think to do was talk to my neighbor. So I took the survey and walked next door to see Martha, the 70-something widow, with the rose garden I'd been trying not to wreck for years. I told her what the surveyor found and said, Martha, I had no idea I want to make this right if you're willing. I'd like to buy that little strip from you. Fair price, proper paperwork, so you're protected, and I'm protected. She looked at the survey, then at me and said, Know what's funny, Ethan? You're the second person this week who told me this fence is a problem, and my stomach dropped a little. She went inside, came back with a manila folder, opened it on her porch table, and inside were blueprints for an 8-foot metal wall with barbed wire on top. Way taller and uglier than anything our rules allow, casting a big shadow over her yard. And at the bottom was my name and a fake engineer's stamp. She told me Martha said that this is what you were going to build if nobody stopped you, that I'd lose my sunlight, that I needed to sign a complaint, and she tapped the paper. I didn't quite trust her, so I kept the copies. That was the moment my fear turned into something sharper, because it wasn't just a strict reading of the rules anymore. This was forged plans and lies, using my name to scare an elderly neighbor into helping build a case against me. Martha being tougher than most people. Half her age still agreed to sell me the 3-foot strip. We went to a real estate attorney, drafted a clean agreement, submitted it to the county. And for a minute, I thought, okay, this is what grown-ups do. We fix the boundary and move on. Then the county clerk called and said, the HOA had filed an objection, accusing me of manipulating property lines to circumvent community standards, which froze the transfer. And I realized Linda didn't want a solution. She wanted a weapon. Around that time, I started talking quietly to other neighbors and heard the same pattern in different versions. People who'd lived here for years suddenly slammed with inspections and violations. Then, right on cue, some investor offering to buy the house as is for less than it was worth, and more than a few of those families were gone. Now their place is sitting empty or freshly renovated. That's when my neighbor Mark, the guy who always seemed to be outside when HOA trucks showed up, pulled me aside one evening and said, if you're really going to push back, you should see this, and slipped a cheap USB drive into my hand. On that drive were emails between Linda and a development company called Summit Horizon Partners, spreadsheets listing addresses in our subdivision labeled target pressured, under contract and payment records from Summit Horizon, to a little LLC registered to Linda's home address, money labeled as consulting and community outreach. I had a professional look it all over, so I'd know I wasn't losing my mind. And the conclusion was exactly what it looked like. Our HOA president was on a developer's payroll, while people in our neighborhood were being squeezed under the cover of enforcement. So when Linda sent out a notice for an emergency community safety and insurance meeting warning everyone that our insurance premiums might jump because of one homeowner's non-compliance, I knew that was my moment. Either I let her hang this whole mess on me, or I put the truth out there and let people decide for themselves. The clubhouse that night was packed, more people than I'd ever seen at a meeting. Some standing in the back, most of them holding that notice and thinking about their wallets, because nothing fills a room faster than the words, premium increase. Linda went first. Of course, standing at the front with her slideshow and calm voice. We are facing an unprecedented challenge to our stability. She said, our insurance carrier has indicated a 40% premium increase due to ongoing disputes related to one homeowner's refusal to comply. Then she clicked and a slide popped up with 140% in huge red letters, and you could feel the anxiety ripple through the room. When she finished framing me as the selfish guy who might cost everyone thousands a year, she said, Mr. Cole has requested to speak. We'll allow him a few minutes, and handed me the microphone like she was doing me a favor. My heart was pounding. But at that point, hiding wasn't going to fix anything. So I took a breath and said, most of you only know me as the guy with the metal fence and the long emails. My name is Ethan. I am that nerd who actually reads the bylaws, and I'm not here to argue about looks. I'm here to talk about what's been happening behind the scenes. I held up the survey and explained the old mapping error, in simple language how the original subdivision lines were off by a few feet, how my old wooden fence and the new one both followed the line. Everyone believed was correct how I'd gone to Martha. Apologized and tried to fix it the right way by buying the strip, so nobody had to pay for that mistake. Then I said, and about that 40% premium increase, I called our insurance carrier this morning. They confirmed in writing there is no rate hike tied to my property or any dispute here, and you could literally see people shift in their chairs because nobody likes realizing their fear just got used as a scare tactic. Then Martha stood up, holding her little folder, and said in this steady voice, "Linda brought me fake plans with Ethan's name on them, told me he was going to build a giant wall if I didn't complain." That wasn't true, and when she held those forged blueprints up so people could see my name, and that fake stamp, the room got very quiet. After that, I laid out the rest as simply as I could. The payments from Summit Horizon to Linda's company, the emails calling certain houses, targets, the pattern of violations and quick, cheap sales. And I said, "You don't have to like my fence, but someone here needs to explain why the person writing your violations is being paid by the company buying your neighbors' homes." Linda tried to brush it off, called the documents fake, said I was lying to avoid consequences. But for once, the room wasn't buying it. People weren't looking at me like I was the problem anymore. They were looking at her. That's when Tom, the vice president who'd looked miserable all night, cleared his throat and said, "Our bylaws, any member can call for a vote to remove an officer with cause," and someone in the second row immediately said, "I call for that vote," and the whole room kind of snapped awake. They passed out little slips of paper, counted them right there at the front table, and when the numbers came back, it wasn't even close. Clear majority to remove Linda as president, effective immediately, and Tom turned to her and said, "You need to surrender your keys, your badge, and your access to the HOA accounts." For the first time since I met her, she didn't have a rule or section number to hide behind. She just sat there for a second, then reached up, unpinned that gold president badge she'd worn like armor for years, and set it on the table. And that small clink sounded like the whole neighborhood finally exhaling. People clapped. Some angry, some relieved. A few came over and thanked me. One guy muttered that I should have just taken the fence down and saved everyone the drama. And honestly, I get why he feels that way too. That night, I leaned against that same fence, looked up and down our quiet little street, and everything felt a bit different, like the curtain had been yanked back, and we'd all seen how easily rules can turn into weapons in the wrong hands. And as much as we'd won that round, I knew the developer still owned houses on the corner, and money like that doesn't just shrug and walk away. So that's my story. The rule follower, who ended up being the troublemaker because he refused to roll over the quiet engineer who had to stand up in front of his neighbors and say, "This isn't right," just to keep 6 feet of metal and a little bit of self-respect. And now I want to hear from you. If you were in my shoes, would you have fought it out or torn the fence down and bought yourself some peace? Do you think HOAs really protect communities, or just hand people like Linda a clipboard and too much power? And where do you draw the line when it comes to standing up for yourself? Where you live, tell me in the comments. Argue with me if you need to share your own HOA or neighbor stories, and if you've ever been on the wrong end of a fake smile and a stack of rules hit like. Send this to someone who needs to hear it, and let me know where you're watching from, because I'm pretty sure Cedar Ridge is not the only place this kind of thing is happening.